Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay. I would like to see the Fireworks Productions of Arizona contract pulled, please. I have a few questions on it.
Okay. The consent agenda is not passed. We're going to pull that item.
I move we approve the remaining portion of the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. The fireworks production will be moved to new business. We have no public hearings. We're on to the hearing from the citizens. If there's any members of the public that would like to address council on any matters not listed on the agenda, just a reminder that council cannot discuss or take legal action on any matters during the call to the public. Okay, seeing no one rushing towards the podium, we're going to move on to reports. I just want to thank Brian Boston, who DJ'd the 4th of July events. So I want to thank Brian Boston and the Chamber for the vendor fair and the parade lineup. So I want to thank the Chamber for that. I got lots of good compliments on that, so well done. No. Okay. So moving on to 11, boards and commissions, discussion pertaining to board liaisons. Is there any reports from boards?
At the PU meeting last night, the manager laid out the schedule and for running the power out to Horseshoe Bend. Right now it's projected to be completed by November.
Economic development met. We did a tour of the airport, looking at economic development out at the airport. And that included, we did have in the budget this year to do the elevator. So they're going to recommend us go through with that project so they can open up that top section for potential development. They discussed possible parking meters at the airport because we have limited parking. We want to make sure that that it's being used strictly for airport traffic. And they discussed the facade improvement program, was the biggest part of the meeting, which would be in the Block 17 section about giving incentives to businesses to dress up the front of their storefronts. So that was recommended through the board as well. And there was some discussion on public art and possibly how to work that into a memorialization of SRP generating station, bringing some of the artifacts from the plant into that artwork on a public setting to remember the power plant moving forward as public art. So I thought that was nice. So.
Okay. Move on to 11.2, discussion pertaining to the Library Advisory Board. We have 2 openings on the board, and we have 1 request to be reappointed.
I move to reappoint Kathleen Spellman to the Library Advisory Board with a term ending June 30th, 2022.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item of business, pertaining to the appointment of the Community Center Board. Again, we have 2 openings and 1 request to be reappointed.
Move to reappoint Naomi Short to the Community Center Advisory Board with the term ending June 30th, 2022.
Second.
Motion, moving on to new business. The first item we will be talking about.
I'm against it because the fireworks show was great. It was beautiful. And also, I am wondering why funds have already been paid when the amount requested is $14,000.
I think so. It
Mayor,
was
Mayor, Council, I'm going to have to check into this here. Linda, you have a little bit of information on this.
so
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I think the reason is when you pay for the fireworks, we have to pay a deposit like 6 months ahead of time for the next year. So $14,000 is the full amount. So the amount that we just paid, a $7,000 figure.
Mhm.
I believe that's the remainder for this year's production. Then come in the spring, we'll pay $7,000 deposit, and then we'll make another payment. So the $14,000 will be will be what actually is paid out in a fiscal year.
Okay, so it's per fiscal year?
It is.
Okay.
The 14,000 is per fiscal year, but I believe half of it goes for the prior year and half of it goes toward the next year's production.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking is because this council earlier this year passed a change in the budget or the purchasing ordinance that anything, that contracts like this can't be split. It has to come to us before it's paid. And that's why I'm inquiring.
Yeah, it wasn't split to avoid.
Well, I kind of figured, I'm just,
Yeah, so
asking.
what happens is the way that this company, and I think the city's used them for several years now, what they require in order, because obviously this is a busy day for them, July 4th, and so what they require in order for us to secure a spot with them, it's essentially a $7,000 deposit that they require
Okay.
on the front end. So it is $14,000 for the one show. In order for them to hold a slot for us, we have to give them a $7,000 deposit by April. And then they lock us in and say, okay, we're coming to Page to do your show.
Okay.
After the show is complete, we pay the remaining $7,000. So technically, the initial deposit is within the city manager spending authority.
Right, yes.
The $7,000. The full contract amount, once the show is completed, it probably should, they've done the show now, so we need to pay them. But that's why it's coming to council now, because the total contract would be $14,000, and so we're looking for council approval for that final
okay.
amount.
And the reason I was asking about the date is because in the last two previous years, this was presented to the council in April and May when it was received. So, and we're getting it after the fact. So, just general curiosities on it, that's all. I move to approve, I move to approve the contract with Fireworks Productions of Arizona for the amount of $14,000.
Second.
motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, item 13.1. Police Chief Sanders, we're going to recognize.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Mr. Mayor, if you would please, I'd love to invite you to join me, and Vice Mayor Kojan, if you could join us, please, on the floor. Also, I'd like to invite Sergeant Miller and his lady Kim to the front. Mr. Mayor and Council, it's my pleasure to publicly recognize newly appointed Sergeant Cody Miller. Sergeant Cody Miller. He went through a testing process. He was selected to fill the role of sergeant in our department. He has been working in our CI division, or Criminal Investigations Division, for quite some time, and he's been reassigned back to that as a sergeant. He's also taken on the role recently of the newly appointed Horseshoe Bend Security Group. So we kind of threw him into the fire right about the time he got promoted. He's done an excellent job. Even as early as today, him and others from investigations are out solving burglaries that happened in our city over the last couple days and recovering property and, addressing the drug problem. So we're so grateful that he's with our department. I would just like to present you with this plaque that officially puts you in the role of a sergeant, and congratulate you for your good work, and looking forward to working with you for many years in the future. Thank you. Thank you.
13.2, discussion pertaining to the Page Utility Enterprise rates, fees, and charges. I believe we have our utility manager here with some good news for us.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The city code ordinance that basically authorizes us to operate as a utility under the City of Page requires us to annually do a rate review. And the rate review, we publicly advertise that. Anybody's welcome to come and speak. We announce whether we look at doing a rate change or whether we look to leave the rates where they're at. In this case, we're looking to leave the rates just right where they're at. There is a little bit of confusion I want to straighten out. It's often thought that the utility board sets rates for the garbage collection, and that's not true. We do the electric, we review the electric, the water, and the wastewater sewer rates. The garbage, we just simply bill for residential garbage only, and then we maintain a fund at your pleasure that we report on and maintain. So with that, we reviewed the utility budget. It's writing black ink. We're able to keep up with our depreciation by recapitalizing. All that's built in the rates. Subsequently, after looking at that, staff recommended that we make no changes to those rates, and the board voted unanimously to City Council to leave the rates where they were at. That meeting took place on June 11th, and that was a unanimous vote.
Thank you.
Clerk, will you introduce resolution number 1225-19, please?
A resolution of the mayor and city council of the city of Page, Coconino County, Arizona, adopting the recommendations of the Page Utilities Board to continue the rate, fees, and charges of services rendered by Page Utility Enterprises without change.
I move to adopt resolution 1225-19.
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion on the rates? Okay, a motion to adopt. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Mr. Harrell, I want to thank you for your fiscal responsibility so that we don't have to raise rates every year. So thank you for your work. Item 3, interfund transfers for fiscal year 2018-2019, closing entries. Ms. Watson.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Once again, we're at that time of year where we're starting to begin our closing entries. And so the Finance Department comes to you for budgetary transfers from one fund to another that need to be made. Just as a reminder, the City Council is the level of budgetary control that has the authority to allow these transfers to occur. So we're requesting authorization to make the first set of interfund transfers for our fiscal year close, as stated below in this council communication. We're asking to transfer $1.4 $1.468 million from the debt service fund to the general fund. That will allow us to cover the PSPRS unfunded liability amount that is budgeted for last year, fiscal 19. We're also asking to transfer $112,780.41 from the highway user fund to the capital projects fund 40 to reimburse that fund for the HERF expenses that were paid out of capital. We're asking to transfer $203,361.89 from the airport fund 46 to the debt service fund. That would cover the debt service portion of the bond payment. We're asking to transfer $45,451.11 from the airport fund to the capital projects fund to offset the airport expenses that were paid from the capital projects fund. And finally, we're asking to transfer $51,787.87 from the land fund for land sales that we had, transferring that from land fund to the capital projects fund as directed by resolution 1146-15. I'll entertain any questions you might have over any of those transfers.
I move to allow the finance director to complete the interfund transfers as stated for end of fiscal year 2019 closing entries.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. .4, discussion pertaining to increase in the city's minimum reserve cash fund balance. Ms. Watson.
Thank you again, Mayor and Council. Okay, this item here in our is a bring back from our FY 2020 budget process discussions that we had. The topic of creating a rainy day fund for the city's future was brought up. With unknown circumstances of how the closure of NGS is coming by the end of 2019 and its effect on the city of Page, along with various unknown future economic changes, the City Council has expressed this desire to have a reserve fund set up and take care of the needs of operations of the city government. I bring to your attention and attached to this agenda item was the resolutions that we had adopted in the past, 1044-10, 1057-11, and 1078-12. 1078-12 is the most recent one. So in that resolution, it says that the City Council's desire was to separate the restricted funds from the unrestricted funds and align the minimum cash balance for unrestricted general funds money only and set the amount at $3.5 million. In listening to the council's desire in the past, I understand that we would like to increase that amount. So I'm asking at this point for us to look at that particular resolution and get direction from the council to see if they have the desire to revisit that resolution and amend it, increasing that balance to whatever is desired by the council. There was some conversation about a general operating budget having about a year's funding set aside for this reserve fund. So in looking at the last 12-month period, our expenses for the last 12-month period were right about $12.2 million for the general fund. So this amount is inclusive of operating and personnel costs, but it does not include interfund transfers. So at this point, there are various motions, as you can see on this council communication. It would be my recommendation if it's the council's pleasure to increase that $3.5 million reserve to $8 million as one option. We would need to have some discussion as to how you would like that done because there are various ways to do that. We could use one of our existing reserve accounts. We could create another bank account. There is the option of creating a fund. I just need direction from the council as to how you would like to address this particular issue and how you would like us to move forward.
Why 8 million are you recommending rather than the 12.2?
Because we don't have 12.
Because to go from $3.5 million to $12 million is a huge jump, and I would prefer not to tie us that drastically. Now, if we did, it was the council's pleasure to go to 12 million. We could try that, and if we felt that we were constrained, I would be coming back to council going, please reconsider. So my thought was, in looking at the overall numbers, our current general fund balance right now, and this is a preliminary June number because I haven't done all the closing entries, is at 14 million. That's going to go down because we have some of our, once I post all those interfund transfers you just approved, that's going to kind of ebb and flow a lot of these numbers, right? So if we were to do 12 million and we have 14 million, we're really close.
Okay.
Oh.
So from looking at the numbers that I saw, I see where that 8 kind of comes from. What I'm assuming you're looking to work toward that 12 with an opening entry of 8 as a first year plan. And next year we can add to it, and we're aiming toward the 12. Is that the intention?
Absolutely. I think what we should do is, first and foremost, look at that resolution, 1078-12, which is that one that is tied with the 3.5 million at this point. Changing that number, that was the last time we looked at it, was 2012. I think we need to do a better job of looking at that annually.
Okay.
And then bringing that back before the city council every year. And so we bring that back in 2020. We set it now, we change it. We bring it back again next year. And we say, hey, is this good? Do you want us to increase it? And let us have that year to adjust from a 3.5 to 8 million.
I totally get that. With a $12 million O&M budget, I get that. I would encourage a separate fund, interest-bearing fund, that we can look at quarterly. Open it at 8. Move the bond payments that I think we have enough money to pay our bond off, correct?
We do have the money in the bank to pay the
So
bond.
that 85% of 1%, we could begin to move into this account on top of it to
That's
build
a
it.
different resolution, but you
Right.
can bring that and
I'm
adjust
just saying,
that.
it's one way to add to it. And then at the end and then next year, we could look at maybe adding a secondary bulk into it to get it to that 12, and then continue that bond payment amount as we move forward. Since we've been operating without it for all these years, it would be good to grow this fund and have a nice reserve for the city in case something bad were to happen. That would be my position on it. And by having a separate fund, then we have a clean line to look at every quarter.
You could do that. My recommendation, though, for the fund, I just want to be clear, in setting up a separate fund, there is no revenue source for this fund. So we can set up a separate fund. Would not be my recommendation to do that. We can do that if that's the council's pleasure. There's no, when it comes to the reporting of the CAFR at the end of the year, we will report those monies within the general fund account. Because when you have a special revenue fund or an enterprise fund or a fiduciary fund or what's my other fund, a capital fund other than the general fund, they have a purpose. They have revenue coming in and expenses going out. So that balance is going to continue to flow. The only thing that would happen in this fund, if you will, is a posting of interest.
Well, and the 85% of 1%.
Yeah.
You can't put that in there yet.
No, but I'm saying it's coming though in the future. That is revenue, right? Or that's.
Well, we got to decide if we're going to let that sunset. But Council Warner.
Yeah. Well, first off, I concur with what Linda's coming up with, is to move $8 million now in fiscal year 2019. I do favor a fund, and there could be activity. I mean, you will have interest bearing that will come in. The reason I advocate for a fund is the transparency. If it's embedded in general fund, like the ordinance is now, none of us really were perceptive of that ordinance, and that's what happens. Ordinance gets put in the clerk's office and reviewed if somebody remembers to look at it. So,
Because I did it.
Yeah.
The reason we did $3.5 million because that's all we had.
no, I understand.
And our budget at that time was only $8 million.
What I'm advocating against, though, is not that. It's the transparency you see with a fund. The fund is right foremost in your budget process. You see that in page 1. And you know, I spent some time putting together a 2021 budget, okay, with transfers and so forth. And so the $8 million now will allow us to move forward into 2021 after this fiscal year with the fund balances that are projected and with the current level of spending and with the traditional transfers, you know, paying off the bond, $5 million. It will allow the general fund to move forward with about a $4.5 million balance after 2021. And if we were to repurpose the 85% to, let's say, 50% capital and 50% emergency fund, that would continue to build that fund about $1.4 million a year. And that's going to take several years to get up to 12. But once you get to 12, you're going to realize the number needs to be 14.
Right.
And so you're really always going to be catching up with spending. So my recommendation is concurrent with what Mark is saying. We establish a emergency reserve fund. We transfer $8 million from the general fund into that fund to establish the base, and that monies would be invested in as long-term investment strategy. And now you've got LGIP funds to the tune of about $8 million now. Those accounts could be utilized with that transfer. So you just simply take that $8 million, move it into this fund, and you've accomplished what you really want to. And then we have to revisit the ordinance that requires the allocation of 85 and 15. And I'm going to share these numbers with you and the manager and just to kind of have. I really believe with this move, it's indicative of us moving in a direction that we look at forecasting our budgets 3, 4, 5 years out. You know, this isn't that difficult to do. And obviously you're going to tweak that every year, but if we're not looking at 3 or 4 or 5 years down the line, we're always looking at that 1 year. And I don't think you can do that. So anyway.
So I think, yeah, the final piece of the conversation is what you alluded to, which was the ordinance that requires a supermajority to access the emergency fund if something bad were to happen. We have to make that discussion or have that discussion as to what those terms are. What is a supermajority and what are the terms of it calls for some type of emergency. I think, you know, we just have to define that. Maybe, I don't know if Josh can help us with that, but we just have to define it.
Yeah, if you wanted to set up a situation where it took a supermajority to tap into that fund, you would just want to define what supermajority is. Is it 2/3? Is it 3/4? And essentially, for the purposes of a 7-member council, the difference is: can you get there with 5, or do you have to have 6? Mm-hmm. So 2/3, you get there with 5. If you go to a 75% majority, supermajority, then it would require 6 of the 7.
You know, I think to access this fund would require an emergency action of council with 6 votes.
So when you say a separate account, so the account's already in the LGIP, so it's just basically how it's reported out.
Yeah.
It's just the reporting.
It's just reported as a fund.
It'll have its own fund number.
I don't think that we need a fund. I think we can just use one of the accounts and rename it as, you know, the reserve.
But you don't see that, Rick. That's the problem.
You see it in the bank account statements. If you name it as the reserve account, then you see it.
Future councils will not see that. Future councils are going to see what the staff prepares in terms of the budget, which is this page. That will not show up. That will never show up unless you dig to look for it. It will show up every year and be very transparent what the balance is every year.
I was with you until I thought about that. I thought about 2 or 3 councils down the road when all of us are gone. I would like for that to be on the first page.
John will still be here.
We have John. Yeah, John will be here, but the rest of us are gone. But yeah, I could see that point, and I think that's a valid point for that to be a page 1 item on there that's separated.
I would just like to ask for clarification, because like I had said, in checking with the auditors, it won't be in their CAFR statement that way. So as long as you know that it's not going to be reported in the CAFR, because it has to fit into one of those, it doesn't fit the specifications of what a special revenue fund is or any one of those funds. So it will be rolled in to the general fund when reporting our annual statement. We can do it internally, is really what it will be. It'll be an internal tracking by setting up the general, to set up a special fund just for a cash reserve.
Well, it's an emergency reserve fund, but you also have, you have JCEF funds, you have
Right.
debt service or miscellaneous grant funds. You have some non-fluid funds now.
They're
No.
all reported in special revenue funds
Well,
in the
yeah.
CAFR, and they are pulled together and they're defined that way.
Okay.
I'm just saying that this won't show up in one of those special revenue funds, because it's not. It's going to, and this is just in conversation with our auditors today.
Okay.
So we can do
Well,
it. I'm
I
not
think-
saying we can't do it. Like Councilmember Rick Yank was saying, we could take the U.S. Bank investment account that has $6 million in it, 6.3 million right now. You can rename that, because that's just money that we've invested. That is not, I mean, if you needed me to pull it in, we could pull it in. We can call that fund from, there's 2 sides of it. There's the banking side of it, and then there's the fund side of it.
Right. And
So we can,
I'm dealing with the fund side of it, because I don't care if you put it in a China bank or a
okay.
New
well,
Zealand bank. The money's in a bank, okay, that's an account.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the transparency of the visual. Every year, a new council who's looking at this will see an account balance on a fund. It will, they will never see an account balance on an LGIP fund that's invested in Phoenix.
Okay,
So that's the reason why I advocate that.
Okay. So in following that theory, we create a fund. We move 8 million from your fund balance in the general fund into this newly created fund. And then from a banking side, where the money actually is, do you want it to just stay where it is? Or do you, because it's all over there, or do you want me to pull it and create another fund with the LGIP, with CVI Investments, with US Bank?
Well, I want
Or
you
do
to,
you
I
care?
want you to create a new fund called Emergency Reserve Fund.
Okay.
Transfer $8 million. And of course, that money's going to sit there. So there's no reason not to gain the maximum amount of return on that money. We're going to be, if we start budgeting 3, 4, 5 years out, we're going to kind of know when the yellow emergency, or when the warning flags are showing, right? So
The safest place would be to put it LGIP, because they're paying 2.3% right now anyway.
yeah, that would be where it would be, and you could put it as a minimum of a year out all the time.
Okay, so let's talk about the LGIP. I have 3 accounts with the LGIP. I have a general account with them that I pull in to reimburse our accounts that we pay, our payables, basically. I have a HERF savings account, so it can't go in there, can't touch that one. And we have the Series 2011 bond reserve, that money that is set up specifically to pay the bond debt off. Do you want me to
It won't go in
create?
the bond reserve, and it won't go in HERF.
So I know. So do you want it to be a part of the regular account that's there? Because right now that balance is at $2.2 million.
Well, what, I mean,
So,
we're making more out of this than it needs to be, in my perspective. You've got $8 million you're going to invest. You're going to create a new fund. You're going to find the highest return investment, whether that's LGIP or whatever, and you're going to move that $8 million in there
From the general
on the general fund. And you're going to invest that perhaps in a new LGIP fund.
right, that's what I'm asking for your direction,
Yeah,
because I
that's
can't
what-
open a new account without council's direction.
I know. So if you need that in the motion, we can certainly accommodate that.
Certainly,
But that would be, in my opinion, the best way to go. You establish a emergency reserve fund, A. B, you create a transfer of $8 million for this fiscal year from the general fund, and then you open a new LGIP long-term investment bank account to accommodate that money. Those three things.
That would be perfect.
So could we use that LGIP that we do have, the 2 million, and move 6 million into there? And then we'll have
that money, that money could stay there. I mean, that money could just stay there. We wouldn't be affected. Really, this would not affect that, because that's already part of the general fund. Some of it's HERF and some of it's general fund, so we wouldn't need to really touch that.
That bond reserve fund that we have with the LGIP to pay off that 2011, I was instructed by council to take some of that money out. So we have, for that money, for that account, as I look at the bank account today, that reserve fund has 3 million in it, but the rest of it, 6 million, other 6 million, is with US Bank, invested and set aside. So that's where I'm asking. We've got 2 accounts currently that are set up to pay off your bond reserve. It has excess money in there between the 2 accounts. Do you want to use that excess money and move it into this other account? Do you want to use one of the accounts that we currently have?
I wouldn't recommend that we do that at this point, because I think the debt service fund will need the $1 million, the $1.3 million for the principal and interest payments this year. It's going to need $5.15 million next year. That's going to leave, and if we transfer $1 million out of that fund surplus to the general fund for next year, that's going to leave that fund with around $2 million. And at that point, we can decide whether we want to continue to utilize that vehicle for PSPRS unfunded liability. There's other things that may pop up that we may want to keep that $2 million in there for. So I would leave that alone for now, take $8 million out of the general fund, invest in a new LGIP bank account, and set up a new fund.
Okay.
Make a motion.
Make a motion.
So we're going to need a resolution to do
Resolution.
this, because we're going to change the resolution. So if that's the consensus of council at the next meeting, we can bring forward a resolution. In the meantime, finance can look and see LGIP, if that's kind of the recommendation, the highest, interest that we can get, then we can bring that back in the form of a resolution that council could adopt at the next meeting. Because we're going to need a resolution at the end of the day to modify the other resolution.
Let's put it on record then in the form of a motion.
To bring a resolution back.
To direct staff to create a resolution to adopt a emergency reserve fund, which would be funded through an $8 million transfer of the general fund, and then the establishment of a new LGIP or other long-term high-yield account to hold the money.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion. So this
Does it really matter if we make a whole new long-term savings account for it? Can't we just use one that we currently have?
Well, we just went through that, and it's just for simplicity's purposes, if you had the dedicated investment account for just this fund alone, now you're not mixing money within accounts. The account is
The one thing I like about having an account would be 6 years down the road, if council decides to go into that, it's clean. You know what I mean? It's one bank account, it's one resolution, it's one supermajority, it's one location to get money from, versus we've got pieces of it scattered in 3 accounts. I think it clouds the water. I think this makes it very clear and clean if council has to reach into that at some point.
the balance on the
That's gonna
account
show
should
up on
equal the balance on the bank account.
Right. Right.
It's
And I
pretty,
think-
pretty easy to
Yeah,
manage.
and I think maybe what Councilmember Davis is saying is you have accounts that are already set up. You could utilize that, change the name, instead of creating another bank account. I get creating the fund, I get moving the money. But when you get to the money side of it, is that what you're saying? Is that use the one account that we already have that's invested with US Bank that has 6 million in there? Or use, I mean, I think that's the one that we would use.
And
Or you
that-
can create another or you have the LGIP general account, but I pull from that, so I'd rather not commingle any of our operating expenses. I want that separate.
That 6.3 account
Yes.
shows in the general, as part of the general fund, right?
It does.
Okay, so that's the same thing. It accomplishes the
Your-
same thing.
Your general fund balance is going to dwindle to about $4.5 million.
That's correct.
So
After
you
the
won't
transfer.
be able to keep that $6 million in there anyway.
Well, again, we're getting confused between the funds and the bank accounts.
Yeah, so if you can pull from that bank account,
Yeah.
then leave it alone. Set up a new one. Set up a new one just for the reserve. Leave that other one alone as part of the general fund, because
Well,
making
where are you
more
gonna
money
get
is a good thing.
8 million. Then where are you gonna get the 8 million?
Yeah, I don't get it.
Well, you're
You
going
don't
to,
have
you
the 8
just said
million.
you could pull down the value, the balance on that account.
On the
You said
fund
out of that
balance.
6 million, you can pull that down. You're going to have to get $8 million anyway.
I said on the bank account, we have a bank account that has 6 million in it that we're invested, that has $6 million of the city's money with US Bank, that is called the US Bank Investment Account. When the council first wanted us to invest money with TDI, that was the first 6 million.
Yeah.
We sent that over, it's being invested, we can pull it out at any time if we needed it. Once you get this resolution done, you're gonna put all the stops in there, if you will, that will say we can't spend less than 8,000, that would be your 8 million, that will be your 8 million. All I'm saying is you have 6 million in that bank account already. We could pull 2 million from other places and boost that up to 8 million.
That's fine.
And
That's
call
fine. If
that-
that's the simplest way to do it that way.
We'll bring it back in,
Yeah, I
in the
don't wanna-
resolution next time as far as what, we can look at
think
what,
you
what's the
understand the
highest
intent.
yield
Yes, absolutely.
and bring it back in the resolution.
Well, on the highest
Let's get us-
yield, it's gonna change.
I was gonna say, what does that do?
for now.
What does that do with the current resolution that says not to bring it below 3.5 million?
You're still going to maintain above that 3.5 because you're going to
Well-
end up with about 4.5.
We're gonna repeal
gonna
that and replace it. So we'll say that resolution's gonna go away and now it's gonna be $8 million.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the table. Will you read me what the motion is? To create for staff to bring back a
Resolution.
resolution for 8 million.
Direct staff to create a resolution to adopt an emergency reserve fund for 8 million, transfer from general fund to establish an LGIP or other account, long-term investment.
So that'll work.
Got it.
That'll work.
Okay.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously
Thanks, Linda.
to bring it back. Last new business discussion pertaining to annual software maintenance and support for Cassell accounting software.
Evening, Mayor and Council. Mine's a little easier. This is for Finance's annual maintenance for their Cassell software. So if you have any questions, let me know.
I move to approve the annual maintenance and support for Casella accounting software in the amount of $12,905.
Second.
Motion and multiple seconds. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thanks,
Motion passes unanimously. So we have left on the agenda 3 executive sessions. The last executive session 3, we're gonna, with council's approval, we're gonna pull that one. Staff's still working with the
Yeah.
VC.
We're not quite ready for
Quite
that
ready.
one yet, so.
Okay.
Patio lease one.
So 2 executive sessions pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A7, RV Park by Boulder Ranch LLC, and executive session 2 pursuant to ARS 38-431.03A4, Chamber Page Lake Powell Agreement for Services.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to recuse myself from 16.1.
Noted.
Mayor, I move we go into two executive sessions consecutively.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
You won't forget to come
Can-
get me, right?
And that's for a conflict of interest, right? Just so it's reflected in the record.
Yeah.
It has to be, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I will participate in 16.2.
My seat's dropping.
So we should. do
Okay,
that.
we'll try to remember to come get you. I'm gonna adjourn. We'll adjourn the regular meeting and go to executive session.
This over.